The autumn rain fell steadily outside Harrison Manor, the sprawling estate that had been in my family for 3 generations. I sat in my father's study, watching droplets trace patterns down the leaded glass windows while my brothers, James and William, argued over who would get which piece of the family fortune. "The summer house in Martha's Vineyard is obviously mine," James declared, running his hand through his expertly styled hair. At 35, he was the eldest and had always assumed he'd inherit the lion's share. William, younger by 2 years, scoffed. "You barely visit. I'm there every season with my family." I remained silent, fingers tracing the worn leather of Dad's old chair. At 28, I was the youngest, and in their eyes, the least worthy. Elizabeth Harrison, the daughter who'd chosen to study business instead of law or medicine, who'd moved away to find herself instead of staying to learn the family business. If they only knew. "Lizzie," James turned to me with his condescending smile, "you can have the cottage in Vermont. It's quaint, perfect for your lifestyle." The cottage in Vermont was the smallest of our family properties, worth maybe a fraction of the main estate. I bit back a smile, remembering the conversation I'd had with Dad 3 years ago in this very room. Mrs. Collins, our family lawyer's assistant, interrupted from the doorway. "The video conference is ready." I checked my watch. 2:55 p.m. Right on schedule. The massive screen on the study wall flickered to life, revealing Margaret Collins, our family's lawyer for the past 20 years. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her expression professionally neutral. "Good afternoon, Harrison family," she began. "As you know, we're here to discuss the distribution of your father's estate following his passing last month. Dad's death had been peaceful, in his sleep, they said. The last time I'd seen him, just a week before, he'd winked at me over dinner. Our secret safe between us. Now," Margaret continued, "I understand you've all had a chance to review the preliminary documents I sent last week." James nodded eagerly. "Yes, and I have some questions about the distribution percentages." "Actually," Margaret interrupted, "those documents were merely procedural. Your father left very specific instructions about how this meeting should proceed." William frowned. "What do you mean?" "The will is straightforward. The estate is to be divided between his children." "That's partially correct." Margaret shuffled some papers. "But first, we need to address the matter of Harrison Global Enterprises." Ah, here it came. I sat up straighter, watching my brother's reactions. "What about the company?" James demanded. As the eldest, I naturally assume. "Harrison Global Enterprises," Margaret cut in, "was sold 3 years ago." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the moments until their world shattered. "Sold?" William's voice cracked. "That's impossible." "To whom?" "To Phoenix Capital Partners," Margaret replied, then paused deliberately. "Specifically to their CEO." James laughed, but it had hysterical edge. "This is absurd. Phoenix Capital, I've never even heard of them. Dad would never sell to strangers." "You're right," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "He wouldn't." Both brothers turned to stare at me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, placing it carefully on Dad's mahogany desk. "Phoenix Capital Partners was founded 4 years ago," I explained, my voice steady. "It's a private investment firm specializing in corporate restructuring and long-term wealth management, and I'm the CEO. The security cameras Dad had installed years ago would have captured their expressions perfectly. James's face draining of color, William's jaw dropping open. "You?" William whispered. "But you were traveling, starting your own business, you said." "I was," I confirmed. "Phoenix Capital was my startup. Dad was my first investor." James lunged for the folder, fingers trembling as he flipped through the documents. Sale agreements, transfer papers, board meeting minutes. All signed and notarized, all completely legal. "This is a joke," he sputtered. "Dad would never. You couldn't possibly." "Your sister," Margaret interjected, "spent 2 years proving herself to your father. She presented a comprehensive plan to modernize Harrison Global Enterprises and expand into new markets. While you two were fighting over corner offices, Elizabeth was learning every aspect of the business. I remembered those long nights with Dad, poring over financials, discussing strategy, proving I had the vision and capability to take our family legacy forward. He'd seen what my brothers never had, that my time away hadn't been aimless wandering, but careful preparation. "The company holdings," Margaret continued, "including all subsidiary businesses, real estate portfolios, and investment accounts, were legally transferred to Phoenix Capital Partners in 2020. Your father remained as chairman emeritus until his passing, but operational control has been with Elizabeth for the past 3 years. William collapsed into a chair. "But the estate? The properties?" I opened my laptop, pulling up the relevant documents. "The manor, the summer house, the properties in Europe, they're all owned by Harrison Global Enterprises, which means they belong to you," James finished, his voice hollow. "To Phoenix Capital," I corrected. "Dad and I restructured everything. More efficient for tax purposes, you see." The rain had stopped outside, weak sunlight breaking through the clouds. Somewhere in the house, the housekeeper was probably preparing afternoon tea, just as she had every day for the past 30 years. But in this room, the world had tilted on its axis. "Why?" William asked. "Why the secrecy? Why not tell us?" I met his eyes steadily. "Would you have accepted it? Working for your little sister? Taking direction from the one you always saw as the family disappointment?" James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This isn't over. We'll contest it." "The will." "Actually," Margaret interrupted again, "we should discuss the will now, because your father left some very interesting conditions regarding your continued involvement with the company." I sat back, watching my brothers' faces. They had no idea that this was just the beginning. Dad's real surprise was still to come, and I had front row seats to watch it unfold. The security cameras whirred quietly in their corners, recording every moment of this historic family meeting. Dad had insisted on keeping the footage for posterity, he'd said with that familiar twinkle in his eye. I touched the old leather of his chair again, feeling closer to him than ever. "Ready when you are, Margaret," I said calmly. "Let's tell them about Phase 2. Margaret adjusted her glasses and looked directly at my brothers through the video screen. "Phase 2 of your father's plan involves a rather unique arrangement for your continued involvement with Harrison Global Enterprises." James was still standing, his perfectly tailored suit now wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. "We don't need arrangements. This is our birthright." "Actually," I interjected, pulling up another document on my laptop, "you both signed away those rights 3 years ago." "What?" William leaned forward. "We never signed anything." I turned my laptop around. "Remember that stack of quarterly reports Dad had you sign? The ones you never bothered to read? Page 394 of each report contained a gradual transfer of your voting rights and company shares to Phoenix Capital. The color drained from their faces as recognition dawned. Dad had always insisted on them signing the quarterly reports, a tradition they'd dismissed as our father's old-fashioned way of keeping them involved in the business. That's fraud, James sputtered. Margaret cleared her throat. Everything was clearly stated in the documents. Your signatures were witnessed and notarized. Your failure to read what you were signing does not constitute fraud. I remembered Dad's words when we devised the strategy. Your brothers think business is about power lunches and corner offices. Let's see if they've learned to read the fine print. However, Margaret continued, your father did not wish to leave you destitute. He believed in second chances, with conditions. She held up a thick envelope. This document outlines Phase 2 of the succession plan. Each of you has the opportunity to earn back a position in the company, along with a significant ownership stake. William's eyes narrowed. What kind of conditions? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manor's grounds. The gardeners were trimming the hedges into their precise shapes, a task that required patience, skill, and attention to detail. Everything my brothers had always lacked. Each of you will start at entry-level positions, I explained. William, given your background in finance, you'll begin in our accounts receivable department. James, with your law degree, you'll start in our compliance division. Entry level? James looked like he might faint. I'm a partner at Stevens and Mitchell. We're a partner, Margaret corrected. Your father arranged for your position there to end today. Same with your banking job, William. The grandfather clock struck 4, its deep chimes echoing through the house. Right on cue, both their phones buzzed with emails. Their resignations, effective immediately, drafted months ago by Dad's legal team. This is insane, William whispered. You can't just... I can, I said quietly, and I have. But unlike you two, I'm offering a genuine opportunity. Prove yourselves over the next 2 years, learn the business from the ground up, and you can earn back your places in the company. And if we refuse, James demanded. I smiled. Then you keep your trust funds, the ones that mature when you turn 65. Until then, you'll receive a modest monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. The security cameras caught James's face, turning an interesting shade of purple. He just bought a new yacht, I recalled. Probably with credit, counting on his inheritance to cover it. There's more, Margaret added. Your father left personal letters for each of you. Elizabeth, would you? I opened Dad's desk drawer and pulled out 2 sealed envelopes. My brothers took them with trembling hands. As they read, I watched their expressions change. Dad had always known exactly what to say to each of us. I'd read my letter the day after he died. Words of pride, trust, and subtle guidance for the challenges ahead. William finished first, sinking deeper into his chair. James crumpled his letter, then smoothed it out again, as if unsure whether to preserve or destroy it. Dad knew, William said softly. About the insider trading. I nodded. And about the embezzlement at your bank. We have all the documentation. James's head snapped up. You're blackmailing us? No, I replied. I'm offering you protection. Accept the positions, work hard, learn the business properly, and those incidents never come to light. Refuse, and well, I shrugged. Phoenix Capital has a strict policy about reporting financial misconduct. The room fell silent except for the faint sound of the gardeners outside. I could almost hear Dad's voice. Power isn't about having the biggest stick, Lizzie. It's about knowing when and how to use it. How long? William asked. How long have you been planning this? I sat back in Dad's chair, feeling its familiar comfort. Remember when I left 6 years ago? You both laughed, said I was running away from responsibility. But I was learning. Harvard Business School, internships at top investment firms, building connections, creating Phoenix Capital from scratch. While we were, James trailed off. While you were coasting on the family name, I finished. Taking shortcuts, breaking laws when it suited you. Margaret cleared her throat. The employment contracts are ready for your review. You'll have 24 hours to decide. After that, the regulatory authorities will receive some very interesting documents. And if we prove ourselves, William asked, after 2 years? I opened another file on my laptop. Then you each receive 20% of the company's shares. I retain controlling interest, but you'll have real power, real responsibility. Earned, not inherited. Why? James's voice was barely a whisper. Why go through all this? Because Dad believed in legacy, I answered. Not just money and property, but values, ethics, real business acumen. He wanted his children to be worthy of the Harrison name, not just entitled to it. I stood up, gathering my things. You have 24 hours. The contracts are with Margaret. I suggest you read them carefully this time. As I walked toward the door, William called out, Where are you going? To the office. Unlike some people, I actually work for a living. I paused at the threshold. Oh, and James, call the yacht broker. You're going to need that money for rent. The security cameras recorded their stunned faces as I left. Outside, the sun had fully emerged, making the wet gardens glisten. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Miss Harrison, my assistant answered. How did it go? Just as Dad predicted, I replied. Have the HR team ready tomorrow morning. I have a feeling we'll have 2 new entry-level employees to orient. And if they refuse? I smiled, thinking of the additional documents hidden in Dad's safe. They won't. Phase 3 will make sure of that. The real game was just beginning, and I had all the pieces in place. Dad had taught me well. Sometimes the best power play is the one your opponents never see coming until it's too late. Part 3. The next morning, Harrison Global Enterprises' Modern Glass headquarters buzzed with unusual energy. Word had spread quickly. The Harrison brothers were starting their first day of work, in entry-level positions. I watched from my top-floor office as James's Maserati pulled into the parking garage, followed by William's more modest BMW. They'd shown up. Phase 3 could begin. They're here, my assistant announced through the intercom. Human Resources is ready for their orientation. Had them sent up here first, I replied. Minutes later, my brothers entered, both looking uncomfortable in business casual attire instead of their usual bespoke suits. James had dark circles under his eyes, and William's usual confident stance was notably absent. Sit, I gestured to the chairs facing my desk. The wall of windows behind me offered a spectacular view of Boston's financial district, a reminder of the power they'd lost and could potentially regain. Before you start orientation, I began. There's something else you need to see. I pressed a button, and a hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a wall safe. Dad's private safe. William recognized it. But that was in his study. This is a replica, I explained, entering the combination. The original is still at the manor. but its contents were moved here last week. Inside was a single USB drive and another envelope. I'd inserted the drive into my laptop, and my father's face appeared on the large screen mounted on the wall. My children, Dad's recorded image spoke, looking exactly as he had a week before his death. If you're watching this, then everything has proceeded according to plan. James shifted in his seat. William leaned forward. Elizabeth, Dad continued, has proven herself beyond my highest expectations. But this was never just about finding a successor. It was about saving our family. The camera panned to show documents spread across his desk. James, William, I know about everything. The insider trading, the embezzlement, the attempts to undermine your sister when she tried to introduce modern practices to our company. My brothers paled. There was more they hadn't told me clearly. But I also remember you as children. William, who cried when his pet fish died and insisted on a proper funeral. James, who gave his allowance to a homeless man and tried to hide it from us. You weren't always driven by greed and entitlement. Dad's eyes seemed to stare directly at them through the screen. That's why I agreed to Elizabeth's plan. Not just to protect our company, but to save you both. Your plan? William turned to me. I nodded. Phase 3 was my idea. Dad modified it, but the core concept was mine. On screen, Dad held up a familiar document. This is the real inheritance document. Elizabeth doesn't just control the company. She controls your futures. But not as a punishment, as an opportunity. He smiled sadly. Your sister understands something you both forgot. True wealth isn't in bank accounts or property deeds. It's in the relationships we build, the trust we earn, and the legacy we leave. James wiped his eyes quickly. William stared at his hands. So here's the final twist, Dad continued. Elizabeth has full discretion over your employment conditions. She can modify them, accelerate them, or terminate them. But there's one condition even she can't change. I opened the envelope from the safe and spread out the contents. Family dinner, I said quietly. Every Sunday. Mandatory attendance. No business talk allowed. Because, Dad's recording continued, you need to remember how to be a family again. Elizabeth will lead the company, but she needs her brothers, not as employees, but as family. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, I could hear the faint hum of the office air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. There's more, I said, pulling out final documents. If you successfully complete 1 year, not 2, of genuine effort in your positions, you'll each receive 15% of company shares. Another 10% will be held in trust for your children. Our children? William looked confused. Your future children, I clarified. Dad believed in planning ahead, way ahead. James stood up and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the bright morning sky. All this, it was never about punishing us, was it? No, I replied. It was about saving you, saving us, as a family. William joined his brother at the window. We were horrible to you, Lizzie. All those years. You were, I agreed. But you're still my brothers. And Dad believed you could change. And you. James turned. Do you believe we can change? I stood up, joining them at the window. Below, the city was fully awake now. People rushing to their offices, living their lives, pursuing their dreams. I believe, I said carefully, that this company needs more than just my vision. It needs your legal expertise, James, properly applied this time. And your financial acumen, William, used for growth, not personal gain. But first, I continued, we need to rebuild trust, starting with Sunday dinner. Where? William asked. The manor? I smiled. My place. I make a mean lasagna. And I have pictures from my Harvard graduation that you never attended, plus evidence of all your childhood embarrassments that Dad secretly saved. James actually laughed, a real laugh, not his usual condescending chuckle. You're going to hold those over us forever, aren't you? Of course. I am a Harrison, after all. The next few months weren't easy. James struggled with taking orders from younger colleagues. William had to relearn basic accounting practices he'd skipped over in his rush to the top. But slowly, things began to change. Sunday dinners became a genuine time for reconnection. Between mouthfuls of lasagna and embarrassing childhood stories, we rediscovered what it meant to be siblings, not just business rivals. 6 months in, I called them both to my office again. They entered cautiously, but with more confidence than that first day. The board is impressed with your progress, I began, especially the ethics committee. Is this about the shares? William asked. It hasn't been a year yet. No, I smiled. This is about phase 4. There's a phase 4? James groaned. Dad's reaching from beyond the grave again. I laughed. Actually, phase 4 is mine. How would you both feel about joining me in a new venture? Something separate from Harrison Global, but complementary. A chance to build something together as equals. Their faces showed surprise, then interest. We spent the next 3 hours discussing possibilities, arguing good-naturedly about business models and market strategies. It felt right. 1 year to the day after that first inheritance meeting, we gathered in Dad's old study. The security cameras were still there, silent witnesses to our family's transformation. I have something to show you, I said, pulling up the footage from that dramatic first meeting. We watched our past selves, barely recognizing the entitled, angry men and the defensive, prepared woman we'd been. We were such idiots, William mused. Were? James quipped, earning a playful punch from our brother. I looked at them. Really looked at them. James had lost the arrogant edge to his smile. William's eyes had regained the kindness I remembered from our childhood, and I had gained something too, brothers I could trust, not just with business, but with my life. Dad would be proud, I said softly, of all of us. The security cameras whirred quietly, recording this moment too. But we didn't need recordings anymore to remember who we were or what we meant to each other. We were Harrisons, not just in name or inheritance, but in spirit. And that, as Dad had known all along, was worth more than any estate.